At our 40th anniversary, he renewed vows with another woman. I gave her the prenup I wrote. The envelope was elegant, gold-trimmed, sealed in wax. I thought it was a surprise for our 40th anniversary until I saw the sender, Selena Monroe. Inside, a photo, Edward, my husband, smiling beside a woman half my age. The card read, "Join us in celebrating 40 years of love with Edward Langley." My name, Margaret Langley, was handwritten on the front. There was even a note, "Your presence means the world." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just placed it on the table, turned off the kettle, and sat in silence. 3 days later, I pulled out my old wedding dress. Ivory lace, hand-sewn hem, tiny seed pearls. It still fit, loosely now. I pinned up my thinning hair, added powder, and slipped on old heels. In the mirror, I looked like someone attending her own funeral. I didn't go for closure. I went so they'd see me. The venue was a garden estate, elegant and distant, made for fairy tales, not betrayals. I walked in alone, past rose petals and violins, the kind of beauty meant to soften a blow. Then I saw it. White chairs, floral arch, twinkling lights. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate the extraordinary love of Edward and Selena." Applause. And me, frozen, silent, at my own husband's wedding. They stepped out smiling, Edward in the cologne I'd bought him, looking 10 years younger. Selena draped in silk white, perfect and poised. He held her hands. "Selena," he said, "you taught me what it means to be chosen." Chosen. After 40 years of burnt dinners, hospital nights, and folding socks in silence, he said he never knew love until her. The crowd sighed. She dabbed a tear. And I stood alone in the grass, unacknowledged. Not a guest, not a wife, just a shadow watching her life be rewritten. Without her. I didn't faint. I didn't scream. I just stood there, still clutching the invitation in my hand like a calling card from hell. Someone brushed past me, a young woman with too much perfume and a clipboard. She glanced at me, blinked, and said, "Oh, ma'am, you're not on the seated list. Family is up front." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Then she smiled and added, "But if you'd like to leave a message for the couple, there's a guest book by the fountain." A guest book at my husband's second wedding, to a woman who had the audacity to invite me. I looked down at the gold script on the invitation again. "Your presence means the world." They didn't mean that. They meant my absence did. They meant they wanted me to witness my own erasure, politely, quietly, in pearls and silence. So I stayed. Not out of pain, but out of spite, because they wanted a clean story. A love that was never tarnished. A man who'd outgrown his past and found something true. And I was going to remind them, gently, graciously, devastatingly, that his past had a name. Mine. Margaret Langley, the first and only Mrs. Edward Langley. And I had a vow of my own, just not the kind they expected. They sat me at the table closest to the kitchen, next to a utility door that swung open every 2 minutes, with the smell of garlic butter and clanging dishes. My name wasn't on the place card. It said Guest 17 in thin script. No last name, no title. A woman I didn't recognize, with too much blush and a laugh that grated like cutlery on glass, leaned over and said, "Are you with the Monroe side or Edwards?" She didn't wait for my answer before turning away. The table was full of people who didn't know me. Strangers sipping champagne, talking about a love story they'd only heard one side of. Not one of them looked over when I sat down, not even my own children. Daniel arrived first, my son. He wore a tailored navy suit that looked like it cost more than my first car. He didn't see me at first, or maybe he did and pretended otherwise. When he finally made eye contact, it was quick, blank. He gave a tight smile, one of those corporate nods people use at networking events. Then came Anna, my daughter. She looked stunning. Recently red silk dress, perfect makeup, earrings that sparkled like her father's promises. She walked in on the arm of a man I didn't know. She passed my table, slowed for half a second, and leaned toward Daniel. "She came?" she whispered, not quite quiet enough. Daniel shrugged. "Don't look, maybe she'll leave." Then Anna laughed, and then, quietly, like a dagger hidden in silk, she muttered, "She looks disgusting. Why would she show up like that?" I turned my head, pretended I didn't hear, stared at the centerpiece, a bouquet of lilies and roses I would have loved 20 years ago. I could feel my hands trembling in my lap, The dress I wore, my wedding dress, once white, now yellowing at the seams, suddenly felt like a costume, like a relic no one wanted to remember. I had raised them, cooked for them, stayed up all night when they had fevers, fought bullies, broke hearts. I missed my own mother's funeral because Anna had appendicitis. I pawned my engagement ring once to pay for Daniel's first semester books when he forgot to apply for aid. But tonight, I was the stain in their story. Up front, the music swelled again. The MC returned to the microphone, a polished smile plastered on his face. And now, friends, he beamed, we reach the most heartfelt moment of the evening. Edward and Selina, two souls who've traveled life's path with depth and grace, are ready to exchange tokens of that journey. Rings symbolizing not just commitment, but rediscovery. I could hear Edward's laugh from across the garden, that same deep charismatic chuckle he used when charming someone new. Before the rings are exchanged, the MC continued, we'd like to invite a very special young man to join us. The bridge between past and future. Selina's son, Nathan. There was polite applause, and then silence as a man walked onto the stage. He looked to be around 30, tall, broad-shouldered, hair thick and dark, just like Edward's used to be before it went gray. But his smile... No, that smile didn't belong to Edward. That smile belonged to someone else entirely, someone I hadn't thought of in years. James, Edward's younger brother. James had lived with us for almost a year, back when he was in college and couldn't afford rent. He'd sleep on our couch, help with the kids, and wash dishes when I cooked too much. He was charming, loud, always chasing something. I never liked the way he looked at me, or at other women. He had no boundaries. Edward said I was being dramatic. One night, I caught Selina sneaking out the back door while James was in the shower. That was 29 years ago. Back then, she was just a friend from work. And now, here she was, being handed a ring by a man who looked exactly like James in his youth. I felt my stomach twist, a slow, deep curl of nausea that crept from the base of my spine to the edge of my throat. Kalina took the ring, kissed her son on the cheek. Edward smiled beside her, clueless or pretending to be. Maybe he'd never done the math, or maybe he didn't care. Nathan stood there, proud. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't glance my way. Why would he? I was just the woman who raised the real family while Edward started a new one behind my back. Then came the final blow. Edward turned to Selina, held her hands, and spoke into the microphone. Selina, for years I wandered, lost in routine, in duty, in what was expected of me. I didn't know what I was missing until you came along. You woke me up, made me feel seen, alive, like I mattered again. The crowd sighed. Selina wiped her cheek dramatically. You are my soulmate, my real companion, the one who didn't just stand beside me, but inspired me to become who I was always meant to be. The MC nodded solemnly. A beautiful tribute to true love found. I stared at Edward, at the man who used to fall asleep with his head in my lap after long days, the man I nursed through pneumonia, through layoffs, through bankruptcy, the man who used to whisper, "Don't leave me, Maggie. I'd be lost without you." And now I was the map he'd burned so he could explore elsewhere. I stood slowly. No one noticed. I walked past the tables, past the champagne flutes and the dessert trays, past the twinkling lights and carefully rehearsed lies. As I reached the exit, I paused just long enough to look back. Edward and Selina were dancing now, swaying under fairy lights, locked in a pose that looked like permanence. But I knew better, because I knew where the cracks were buried. And I still had the original blueprint. They thought this was the beginning, but it was just the second act, and I was no longer an extra in their play. I wasn't always like this. There was a time, not so long ago, though it feels like another life now, when heads would turn when I entered a room, when people leaned in to hear what I had to say, when my laughter was light, and my posture was proud, and my hair caught the sun just right. I was the kind of beautiful that didn't need explanation. Not flashy, not loud, just present, unapologetically alive. I was 21 when I met Edward. He was 26, already on his second company car and first heartbreak. He was charming back then, tall, ambitious, and just broken enough to feel like a project. I mistook the cracks in him for places I could pour my love into. He said I looked like someone out of a painting. that I was the kind of woman men write songs about and spend decades regretting losing. I believed him. I fell fast. I thought he did too. We got married in the spring. I wore the ivory lace dress my mother helped sew. He wore his late father's cufflinks and grinned like a man who'd won something precious. I didn't notice that he always looked around when pretty waitresses passed our table. I didn't notice that he never remembered my favorite flower or the name of my sister. I thought marriage would smooth those things out, that love would be enough. We bought a house, modest and bright, with a garden out front. I got pregnant 6 months after the honeymoon. Daniel was born first, then Anna 2 years later. I had dreams, finishing my degree in English, becoming a teacher, maybe publishing that collection of poems I'd scribbled in college, but then the daycare was too expensive. Then Edward lost his job for the first time. Then Daniel got sick and needed round-the-clock care for 3 months. And suddenly, I wasn't a woman with dreams anymore. I was a mother. Then I was a homemaker. Then I was background noise. I told myself it was okay, that I was doing something noble, that my sacrifice meant something. But sacrifices, I've learned, only count when someone remembers them. By the time Anna turned 5, Edward had started staying out late. Meetings, he'd say. Networking, client drinks. I'd stay up waiting. Sometimes I'd fall asleep on the couch, my neck stiff and my heart hopeful. One night, he came home at 3:17 a.m., smelling like hotel soap and someone else's perfume. I said nothing. I wanted to scream, but Anna had a field trip the next morning and Daniel had his first piano recital. So I made breakfast. So I smiled. So I folded his shirt the next day, even as my hands shook. When Daniel was 10, I found the first real proof, a receipt for 2 at a restaurant I'd never been to, on our anniversary. I confronted him, quietly, in our bedroom after the kids were asleep. He looked me in the eye and said, "Don't ruin this over something small." And I didn't. Because I had children who loved their father. Because I still believed he might come back to me. Because somewhere, deep down, I thought this was what love looked like. Patient, enduring, one-sided. The years blurred. One day I woke up and didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. My once bright hair was streaked with gray and tied in a permanent knot. My hands, once soft and ink-stained from poems, were red from dishwater and cracked from winters without gloves. My posture was curved not by age, but by years of leaning down to clean, to comfort, to carry. I looked tired even when I slept. I looked quiet even when I spoke. I looked invisible even to myself. But Daniel always had clean clothes, and Anna never missed a birthday party, and Edward always had dinner hot on the table, even when he came home 2 hours late. I called that love. I remember the day Anna told me I was embarrassing. She was 15. We were at the mall, and I had worn one of Edward's old sweaters over my dress because the air conditioning was too cold. I had tried to fix my hair in the car mirror, but didn't have time to redo my makeup. She looked at me, then looked around and whispered, "Can you walk behind me?" I said nothing, just nodded. That night, I went to bed early. Edward came in past midnight, drunk and laughing into his phone. I stared at the ceiling and thought, this is how women vanish. Not all at once, just one insult, one silence, one missed hug at a time. I used to be radiant, but light can't shine forever when no one looks at it. They say I let myself go, but I didn't let go. I was pushed. I was worn down. I was used by children who only remembered the mother who packed lunches, not the woman who loved books and Bach and red lipstick, by a husband who only saw me as something to lean on until he found something younger, shinier, easier. Every wrinkle on my face has a name. Every sag in my skin is a price I paid. And yet, when they saw me at that wedding, in that old dress, with my back a little curved and my shoes a little scuffed, they saw shame. They didn't see the war I'd fought. They didn't see the fortress I had been. They didn't see that I had burned so bright for them that there was barely anything left of me. Until now. Because now, I'm tired of being a ghost in my own life. Now, I remember who I was. And if they think I'm done, then they've forgotten who built the house they're standing in. And what happens when the woman who laid the foundation decides she's done being quiet? I left the party before the cake was served. No one stopped me. Not Edward, not Selena, not even my children. I walked past the valet, who didn't recognize me from earlier. I waved him off and found my own keys in my handbag. The drive home was quiet. No music, no tears. Just the sound of rubber on pavement and the dull thump of my heart against my ribs. I wasn't sad. I was steady, like a pendulum that had finally stopped swinging. When I got home, I didn't take off my dress. I didn't wipe off the powder from my cheeks or untie the bun in my hair. I went straight to the bedroom and dropped to my knees in front of the old walnut dresser. The second drawer stuck, just like always. I bumped it with my hip. It groaned open. Beneath the folded sheets and a box of expired Christmas cards, there was the little black key. I hadn't touched it in almost 4 decades. I stood up, walked to the closet, pulled away the coats, and reached behind the sewing box. There, behind a stack of tax returns and birth certificates, was the fireproof safe. I unlocked it. The hinges moaned. And there it was, just as I remembered. A manila folder with a single label in my handwriting. Prenup draft, 1985. I had written it the year Anna was born. Edward had just started his second business, and I was still working part-time as a paralegal. I had asked one of the lawyers I trusted to walk me through the language. Just in case, I told him. Just in case things didn't work out one day. He'd smiled kindly, maybe even pityingly. No one thought I'd need it. And I never showed it to Edward. Because I was afraid. Afraid he'd see it as a betrayal, as a lack of faith, as a threat. I was afraid he'd walk away. I had just had a baby. I didn't want to start over. I didn't want to lose him. Not then. So I tucked the folder away, and I kept choosing him, even as he stopped choosing me. But tonight, the fear was gone. Fear lives in the hope of still being wanted. I no longer hoped. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of weak tea and turned on the lamp. The folder was yellowed at the edges. Inside were 6 pages, typed on my old Smith Corona typewriter. Ink faded but legible. I read every line slowly, like I was seeing them for the first time. Page 3. In the event of dissolution of marriage, all jointly acquired property shall be divided equitably, but the primary residence, if purchased prior to marriage or maintained solely by one party, shall revert to that individual. That house was mine. It had always been mine. Bought with money from my inheritance after my mother died, paid off with overtime shifts in grocery coupons and 1,000 quiet sacrifices. And now I would protect it. Not with pleading, not with tears, but with ink. I opened my laptop and rewrote the entire document, line by line, clause by clause. This time, no hesitation, no compromise. I added new sections. I removed the word equitably. I replaced it with solely, undisputedly, non-negotiable. I included a detailed appendix of all property and liquid assets. I attached the deed to the house, the vehicle titles, the savings account I'd built quietly in my name over the past 5 years, bit by bit, from birthday money, leftover grocery cash, and the side sewing jobs I did while Edward was networking. I wrote a cover page. Edward, this is the contract I should have asked you to sign 40 years ago. You built a future without me. I'm simply making sure you don't take mine with you. Best, Margaret. The next morning, I dressed simply. Slacks, cardigan, flats, hair pulled back, no makeup. I didn't need to be pretty anymore. I needed to be clear. At 10:30 a.m. I walked into a law office I hadn't visited since 1992. They still had my name in the system. The receptionist blinked at me when I handed her the folder. I'd like to notarize this, I said calmly, and I'd like to speak to someone about a rapid divorce filing. Within 30 minutes, I was seated across from a woman named Lynn, early 40s, firm handshake, sharp eyes. She listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. When I was finished, she asked, "Do you want to fight for spousal support?" I shook my head. "I want my house, my savings, my name. He can have the rest of his story." She nodded. I slid the signed prenup across the table. "This was written in 1985, I said, "but I never signed it. I was afraid he'd leave." Lynn read the first page, then looked up at me. "And now?" I smiled. "Now, there's nothing left to lose." That night, I lit a candle in the living room. Not for peace, not for memory, but for marking the moment. Because this wasn't the beginning of a breakdown, it was the beginning of my rebuild. I had loved Edward. I had loved my children. I had loved this life we built, even when it drained me. But now, love was not enough. Now, I needed boundaries. Now, I needed walls he could no longer walk through, and rules his charm could no longer bend. He had chosen another woman, so I chose myself. And for the first time in 40 years, I signed my name, and meant it. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I wrote a letter. I signed a contract. I sealed an envelope. And I gave them the only wedding gift I thought appropriate: truth. Not the sugary kind that hides behind polite smiles and social graces. Not the filtered kind people sprinkle into toasts and speeches. No, this was truth, with sharp corners and clean cuts. Truth with legal weight. Truth they couldn't throw away. 3 days after the ceremony, after the champagne flutes were cleared, after the last filtered photo was posted with hashtags like "Forever Begins" and "Finally Found You," they hosted a private dinner at a local French bistro. It was invitation only, which, of course, I received. This one came from Edward himself, handwritten in silver pen. "No hard feelings, Maggie. I'd love for you to see that we're doing this with love and respect." Love and respect. He used those words like old coins, worn smooth by overuse, worthless in real life. Still, I RSVP'd, unable to attend, sending something in my place. And I did. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, no bow, no flowers. Inside were 3 items: the notarized prenup, with all 6 pages initialed and signed, me on every line; a divorce petition, formally filed and time-stamped; an addendum summary of assets, clearly outlining what belonged to whom: house, car, joint accounts, investments, retirement; and a final line: all assets listed are legally documented as the sole property of Margaret Langley. The cover letter was short. "Selina, you've won the man, but I've kept the life. Best of luck. You'll need it. Margaret." I hired a courier, someone professional, polite, efficient. She delivered the envelope to their dinner table at precisely 7:43 p.m., just as Edward was raising his glass for a second round of toasts. I wasn't there, but I can picture it. Selina in a pearl-toned cocktail dress, smile stretching wide. Edward, basking in borrowed youth, a man too foolish to know he'd just toasted his last drop of comfort. The courier placed the envelope between their wine glasses and said, "From Mrs. Langley." I imagined the silence spread like spilled red wine. I got a call from Daniel the next morning. He didn't even say hello. Just, "What did you do?" I let him rant for nearly 5 minutes, accusing, panicked, ashamed. Apparently, Selina had opened the envelope in front of everyone. She hadn't even made it past page 2 before her hands started to shake. Edward, confused, tried to laugh it off, until he saw the notarization, the lawyer's stamp, and the words, "Petitioner requests that respondent vacate the premises within 30 days. Daniel said, "You made Dad look like a fool," and I said he did that on his own. Then I hung up. That afternoon, Selina sent me an email. No greeting, no apology, just, "You're a bitter old woman. This won't bring him back." I replied with one sentence. "He was gone long before you showed up. All I did was close the door behind him." She didn't write back. The next week, I had the locks changed. Edward didn't return home right away. He went to stay with Selina. Or maybe her son, maybe a hotel. I didn't care. When he finally showed up, it was 3 days before the 30-day mark. He didn't knock. I just stood at the gate like a man who had misplaced his key and his dignity in the same moment. I stepped outside, calm, pressed together in a linen blouse and fresh lipstick, the color I hadn't worn since 1997. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded toward the gate. On that side, he flinched. "You didn't have to humiliate me." "You did that," I said, "when you invited me to watch you rehearse a life you already lived. With me." He looked away. "Celine is upset." I smiled. "Then she knows how it feels." He left with a suitcase and a manila envelope of his own. Inside it, a copy of the signed prenup, the divorce petition, a detailed explanation of why he had no legal claim to anything but his own name, 40 years of marriage, 3 affairs, 2 children who no longer looked at me like family, and now, one very clean ending. No house, no savings, no car, just the woman he called his soulmate and a reality she hadn't read the fine print on. I didn't need to slam a door or throw a vase. I didn't need to scream or demand closure. I had already closed the chapter, with a signature, with a seal, and a courier's polite smile as she said, "Congratulations, it's official." The first call came at 8:03 IAEM. I recognized Daniel's number. I didn't hesitate. I answered. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped. No greeting, no pause. "Do you realize what you've cost, Dad?" I said nothing. "He lost everything, the house, the accounts. He's living out of a guest room at Nathan's place. Is this revenge, Mom? You humiliated him." Still, I said nothing. "You didn't have to go that far," he continued, voice sharp with resentment. "You always said family was the most important thing." Family. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Thank you for calling, Daniel," and hung up. The second blow came by text, less than 10 minutes later. "Anna, really, Mom? You embarrassed yourself, and now you're making it about money? I don't even know who you are anymore." Then another. "You've always been so dramatic. Maybe now that Dad's moved on, you should too." And then the one that lingered longest. "You just can't stand to see someone else happy, can you?" I stared at the screen for a long time. No mention of the wedding. No mention of the woman their father paraded in front of me. No acknowledgement of the years I bled for them in silence. Just contempt. They weren't angry that I'd been erased. They were angry that I didn't go quietly. I walked to the file cabinet in the corner of my bedroom. The drawer stuck at first, always did. I yanked it hard, the metal scraping loud against itself. I pulled out a brown envelope. Inside, my will. Drafted 10 years ago, updated 3 times. Daniel and Anna were listed as co-beneficiaries. The house, the savings, the annuity, the paintings, the jewelry, passed down from my mother. It was all meant to go to them, because I thought that's what love meant, providing, even after I was gone. I laid the document on the desk, picked up my pen, crossed out their names, every one of them. The new version was shorter, cleaner. The house would go to a local shelter for women fleeing domestic abuse, an organization I'd once donated to in secret. I added a note requesting it be used as transitional housing, a soft place to land for women starting over. The savings, the car, and the remaining estate were split between that shelter and one more name, Claire, my friend. The one person who stood up for me at that wedding, who walked over, put her hand on my back, and whispered, "You don't have to sit through this, Maggie. You don't owe them your pain." The only person who looked at me and still saw a woman, not a role, not a relic. She hadn't judged my dress or my silence. She had offered me a ride home. She had come back the next day with flowers and pie and a stack of old photo albums she said we'd laugh through eventually. She didn't owe me anything, but she gave me everything my own children refused to. I called the notary that afternoon. We signed the updated will in my kitchen. No drama, no ceremony, just initials, signatures, and one quiet line I wrote in the margin myself. I once believed motherhood was unconditional, but I've learned it should never be unreciprocated. Later that night, I stood in the hallway, staring at the framed photos lining the walls. Daniel's graduation, Anna's sweet 16, family vacations, all funded by sacrifice. Smiles that hid exhaustion, memories that didn't include my pain. I took them down, one by one, wrapped them gently in newspaper, placed them in a box labeled, "For storage." Not thrown away, not destroyed, just removed from the places where I once needed to see love reflected. I used to believe that being a mother meant giving everything, but now I see the truth. You can give everything and still be disposable. And if they could call me selfish for finally choosing myself, so be it, because the truth is simple. I was their mother. But they were never truly mine. Not when they chose convenience over character. Not when they stood by a man who betrayed me and a woman who tried to erase me. Not when they told me I was the problem for finally saying enough. I'm done proving my worth to people who measured it in silence, and I'm done mourning children who stopped being mine the moment I stopped being useful. They lost a mother, but I gained something far greater. A future where I don't have to ask for space in a life I built. A peace that doesn't ask for permission, and a voice that no longer trembles when I say, "I choose me." It was a rainy Thursday when Edward showed up at my door. I hadn't heard from him in over a week, not since the dinner, Not since the prenup, not since the locks were changed. He didn't knock right away. Just stood there in the drizzle, clutching an umbrella like a man unsure of whether he was arriving or retreating. When I finally opened the door, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not older, not weaker, just less. His suit was wrinkled, his shoes muddied, his hair messy in the way that used to charm me when we were young. Now it just looked careless. "Maggie," he said, the words soft as steam. I didn't answer. "Can I come in?" "No." He glanced down, ashamed. And didn't know what she'd done. I swear I didn't. I crossed my arms, letting silence sit where compassion used to live. He cleared his throat. "I was stupid. I see that now. I lost everything, but you were always steady. Always. You." Still I said nothing, because what do you say to a man who tried to replace you before you were even gone? He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was damp at the corners, smudged. I had the test done." I didn't move. He handed it to me like a child passing forward a note in class. I didn't even have to unfold it. I knew what it said. 2 weeks earlier, a letter had arrived at my lawyer's office. Anonymous. Inside were 2 items, a tip and a hair. Nathan's hair. The note was short. "He's not who you think he is. Ask for a DNA test." From Edward's side and James's. James, Edward's younger brother. The one who once slept on our couch. Who used to babysit when I ran errands. Who flirted shamelessly with anything that breathed. The one who disappeared abruptly when Selina first entered our lives. The resemblance I'd noticed at the ceremony wasn't my imagination. It was memory screaming to be acknowledged. I'd passed the evidence to Lynn, my lawyer. She handled the rest. The results were conclusive. Nathan was not Edward's son. He was James's. Selina's child had never been Edward's legacy. He had been James's mistake, or Selena's strategy, or both. Edward shifted on the porch. The rain had begun to soak through his coat, dripping from the edges of his sleeves. "I didn't know," he whispered again. "I didn't know she'd been with James. Not then." I raised my eyes slowly, deliberately, until I met his. He flinched. For once, he didn't have the upper hand. Not with charm. Not with nostalgia. Not with shared history. I stepped forward. "Do you remember the night I found the receipt?" I asked, voice low. He blinked. "What receipt?" "The one from 1994. 2 entrees, champagne, a hotel room. You said it was for a client." His face twitched. "That was business." "No," I said, sharper now. "That was Selina." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I kept going. "You started something with her nearly 30 years ago. You left crumbs everywhere. But I stayed. For the kids. For the house. For the version of you I thought still existed." He shook his head. "It wasn't like that." "It always was." I stepped back, placing the DNA test gently on the side table just inside the door. "You replaced me while I was still breathing," I said, "and then tried to parade my corpse past a crowd like I'd died quietly and gracefully." He said nothing. Only the rain filled the silence now. "And now," I added, "you know how it feels." He furrowed his brow. "To be replaced," I said. "To look at someone and realize you never mattered as much as you thought you did." He staggered back like I'd struck him. "Maggie, please." "No." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This isn't forgiveness," I said. "This isn't closure. This is clarity." I let the next words fall slowly, one by one. "I loved you more than you deserved, and I buried myself for your comfort, but I'm not your widow. I'm your lesson." He left without another word. Didn't even take the umbrella. Just walked into the storm, shoulders hunched, a man undone, not by anger, but by being seen for the first time. That night, I lit a single candle in the kitchen. Not for him, for me. Not for grief, for survival. Not for what was lost, but for what I had refused to lose any longer. Myself. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the rain wash away whatever was left of the man I once called home. Because now, I didn't need his name. I had reclaimed my own. And that was the final vow. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning. It took just under 7 minutes. The judge barely looked up from the papers. Edward didn't show up. His lawyer handled it all on his behalf. There were no arguments, no final pleas, No attempts to reconcile, just signatures, initials, and silence. The kind of silence that felt not empty, but complete. I stepped out of the courthouse with the decree in my hand and sunlight warming my shoulders. The air felt clearer than it had in years, like someone had finally opened a window in a house that had been suffocating for decades. Outside, Claire was waiting in her little blue hatchback, engine running, sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown she'd never bothered to polish. She rolled down the window and grinned. "So, are we officially done with that bastard?" I held up the document like a trophy, that free and legally fabulous. She whooped and leaned across the passenger seat to push open the door. "Then get in. We've got plane tickets and no curfews." The house was empty when we returned. Edward and Selina had left the day before. I'd given them a deadline and stuck to it. No exceptions, no delays. My lawyer had arranged everything, clean break, no contact. They didn't even leave a note. Fine by me. The bedroom was stripped bare. No photographs, no cufflinks, no scent of his aftershave lingering on the pillow. Just the quiet echo of something that used to feel like love, and now felt like relief. In the garage, the extra key to his Jaguar was still hanging on its hook. But the car? Gone. Let them have it. They'd need something to drive away from the wreckage. Claire and I packed light. We didn't need much. A few dresses, a pair of walking shoes, a scarf or two for the wind, and my camera. Dusty, but faithful. The one Edward gave me for our 20th anniversary, and then promptly forgot about. He never asked to see the photos I took, but now, someone would. We flew to Tuscany first, rented a small villa on the edge of a vineyard. Every morning, we sipped cappuccinos on a terrace overlooking olive trees. Every afternoon, we wandered cobblestone streets and bought things we didn't need, postcards, painted bowls, bottles of perfume we opened just to inhale like memory. At night, we drank wine, real wine, the kind that made your teeth red and your heart soft. Claire would toast something new each time, to freedom, to good shoes, to old music, to fresh starts. And I'd raise my glass. Not because I needed to celebrate, but because, for the first time in decades, I had something to toast that wasn't someone else's achievement. We danced in Barcelona. We wrote poems in Paris. We got matching scarves in Marrakesh and laughed ourselves breathless, haggling over candlesticks we didn't need. In Japan, a stranger took our photo under cherry blossoms. When I looked at the picture later, I almost didn't recognize myself. The woman in the frame was standing tall, shoulders back, hair swept with wind, eyes open, not wide with fear, but wide with the wonder of still being here. We didn't talk about Edward much. Sometimes his name would come up when we passed a restaurant I used to dream of trying, or when I saw a suit that looked like one I once pressed for him before a job interview, or when a song played that he used to hum back when he was still mine. But mostly he was just gone. Not a ghost, not even a scar, just absence. And that, somehow, was more peaceful than pain. One night in Greece, after too many glasses of red, Claire looked at me across the candlelit table and said, "You know, I always admired you." I raised an eyebrow. For what? Staying too long? For giving too much? She shook her head. For surviving it without becoming bitter. I thought about that for a moment. Let the weight of it settle in. "I didn't survive it because I was strong," I said. "I survived because I was too tired to keep dying slowly." Then I laughed. Then we both did. Because it was true. By the end of the 3rd month, I had more stamps in my passport than I'd ever imagined. More freckles, more laughs, more breath. I looked in mirrors and no longer searched for youth. I searched for presence, and I found it. Everywhere. When I got home, the house was just as I'd left it, but it didn't feel like the same place. It felt like mine. Every wall had been scrubbed clean of their presence. Every room breathed differently. The silence wasn't heavy. It was honest. I unpacked slowly, hung up the dresses. I printed a few photos and taped them to the fridge. Not framed, not perfect, just there, just real. And then I poured a cup of tea, stepped out onto the porch, and watched the sun melt across the horizon. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. The next morning a letter arrived. From Daniel. No apology, just a line that read, "I still don't understand why you had to ruin everything." I folded the paper once, then again, then dropped it in the recycling bin. Because here's the truth. I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending. I used to think the worst thing a woman could be was forgotten. Now I know it's worse to forget yourself. And I had, for so long. But now I remembered. What I loved, what I wanted, what I deserved, and it had never been scraps from a man's pocket or praise from a child who only called when he needed something. It had been this, a seat at my own table, a story I didn't have to whisper, a name I didn't need anyone to pronounce for me. No, I didn't win. I just stopped losing. That was enough. Betrayal is never silent. It lingers in missing names, forgotten glances, empty chairs. But the woman they pushed aside, she held the ending. They thought my silence meant surrender. It meant I was watching, waiting. And when I finally spoke, it wasn't revenge. It was truth, signed, delivered, unapologetic. If you've ever been erased, overlooked, or used, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Because the quiet ones, we're never really gone. We're just getting ready.